The word everyone has been arguing about for 50 years is not in the manuscript. It was never there. My institution recently acquired a high-resolution facsimile, a photographic reproduction, printed to scale, of Nag Hammadi Codex Sect. The original is in the Coptic Museum in Cairo. What we have is a research copy, crisp enough to see individual papyrus fibers in the undamaged sections, clear enough, where the text survives, to read the Coptic script character by character. I have been teaching a seminar on New Testament textual criticism and manuscript archaeology for 6 years. I had read about the Gospel of Philip's kiss passage dozens of times. In Pagels, in Ehrman, in the popular books, in the footnotes the popular books weren't willing to cite. I had assigned it to graduate students. I located page 63 of the Codex in the facsimile. I found the passage, and I looked at the place where the word should be. When I first read this, actually looked at the manuscript page, and saw where the word would be, something shifted that I have not been able to fully name since. There is no smudged letter. There is no partially visible Coptic character that a paleographer might argue over. There is a hole. The papyrus fiber is simply gone at that point. The material has been missing for some time, eaten by moisture, or torn, or dissolved over 16 centuries of lying in a clay jar in the Egyptian desert. The word that billions of people have argued about, the word that built a best-selling novel, the word that has been called the proof of a secret marriage and the smoking gun of church censorship. The word that appears on theological blogs and Reddit forums and documentary narration as if everyone agrees what it says. That word is not faded, it is not smudged, it is not illegible, it is absent. I wrote 4 words in my notebook, the word is not there. Then I put my pen down and sat for a moment without writing anything else. The year is 367 of the Common Era. You are somewhere near Nag Hammadi, in the Upper Nile region of Egypt. You are holding something, a collection of leather-bound codices, books in the format that was still relatively new in the 4th century. You have read them. Perhaps you have copied sections. These are not obscure documents to you. They are the texts your community uses, the accounts your teachers passed down, the sayings and visions that give your understanding of Jesus its particular shape. Then the letter arrived from Alexandria. The bishop, Athanasius, issued his 39th festal letter in the spring of 367. In it, he named exactly 27 books as belonging to the true Christian canon. He was the first bishop in history to list them, the first to draw that line with that kind of authority. He was explicit. Anything outside this list is to be destroyed. You are standing with a collection of texts that are not on the list. Someone has made a decision about what truth looks like. You have your own decision to make. Fire or jar. You choose the jar. You seal it with bitumen. You carry it to a cliff outside the village, to a natural depression in the rock. You bury it there. You do not know, you cannot know, that the desert will keep it for 1,578 years, that a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman will break it open in December of 1945 while looking for fertilizer, that the most debated word in early Christian history will be found inside, with a hole exactly where the argument lives. Let me tell you what the passage actually says, because most people have never read it. They have read descriptions of it, summaries of it, arguments about it. They have read what other people said about what it says. The passage comes from the Gospel of Philip, Nag Hammadi Codex II, Tractate 3, page 63, lines 34 through 36. The translation most scholars use is by Wesley Eisenberg, published in the Nag Hammadi Library in English, edited by James Robinson, HarperCollins, 1988. Here is what it says. And the companion of the Savior is Mary Magdalene. But Christ loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on her blank. The rest of the disciples were offended by it and expressed disapproval. They said to him, "Why do you love her more than all of us?" The Savior answered and said to them, "Why do I not love you like her?" The word I rendered as blank is not a translation choice. It is a physical description of the manuscript. There are actually 3 lacunae, 3 places where the papyrus is damaged. In this passage, brackets appear in multiple locations where the text has been reconstructed by scholars making educated inferences about what was likely there. But the most significant lacuna, the one that every book and documentary has treated as the center of the controversy, is the word that follows the phrase "on her." The most common proposed reconstruction is mouth. It was proposed by early translators in the 1980s, working from the damaged codex. They looked at the physical size of the hole in the papyrus. They considered the grammatical context. They proposed mouth as the most plausible completion based on those factors. It is a hypothesis, not a recovered word, not a faded letter that could be read with the right light. A hypothesis about a blank space. The scholars who proposed mouth were doing precisely what scholars are supposed to do with a damaged text. Make an educated inference, label it as such, and note the uncertainty. Then the caveats were stripped away. Then the hypothesis became a fact. Then the fact became a controversy. Then the controversy became a best-selling novel. The word mouth is not in the Gospel of Philip. It is in the reconstruction of the Gospel of Philip. Those are 2 different documents, and that's when everything fell apart. Not the text itself, but my understanding of what the controversy had actually been about for 50 years. I realized almost no one was arguing about the Gospel of Philip. They were arguing about what someone had written into its silences. December of 1945. Muhammad Ali al-Saman was a farmer from the village of Al-Qasr, near the cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif in Upper Egypt. He was digging at the base of those cliffs with his brothers, looking for sabak, the soft, nitrogen-rich soil that Nile farmers use to fertilize their fields. His mattock struck something hard. He dug around it, a red earthenware jar, sealed, approximately 60 centimeters tall. He later told researchers he hesitated before opening it. He opened it anyway. Inside, 13 leather-bound codices, wrapped in leather covers, some still intact after 16 centuries, some deteriorating. 46 texts representing 52 separate tractates, written in Coptic on papyrus leaves. One of his brothers reportedly used some of the loose papyrus leaves to start a fire that morning. The remainder made their way through a complicated series of transfers onto the Egyptian antiquities black market, eventually acquired by the Egyptian government and studied by scholars worldwide. James Robinson, professor of religion at Claremont Graduate University, coordinated the first complete English translation, the Nag Hammadi Library, 1988. 43 years after the jar was opened. The Gospel of Philip is Tractate 3 in Codex 2. It is a Valentinian Gnostic text, almost certainly composed in the 3rd century of the Common Era, most likely in Syria, within a specific theological tradition that had a sophisticated understanding of sacrament, spirit, and the transmission of divine knowledge. It is not a biographical account of Jesus. It is not a love story. It is a theological document. And the kiss passage is not what people think it is. At some point in your religious education, someone taught you about Mary Magdalene. Maybe you were 7. Maybe you were 17. They told you she was a repentant sinner, a woman who had lived a certain kind of life and came to Jesus in contrition and was forgiven. That version of Magdalene is the one that traveled through 2,000 years of sermons, paintings, stained glass windows, hospital names, and films, weeping, sinful, redeemed, the version that knows her place. They did not tell you that version was invented. Not in the 1st century, not even in the 4th. In 591 of the Common Era, a pope named Gregory I, later called Gregory the Great, gave a homily, Aemilia 33. In it, he combined 3 completely separate women from the Gospels into one person, Mary of Bethany, the woman who sat at Jesus' feet and listened while her sister Martha prepared food. The unnamed sinful woman of Luke chapter 7, who wept over Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair in the house of Simon the Pharisee. And Mary Magdalene, the woman from Magdala who supported Jesus financially, who was present at the crucifixion when most of the male disciples had fled, who came to the tomb, who was the first witness of the resurrection. 3 different women, different names, different cities, different contexts, different stories. Pope Gregory declared them the same person, without a single verse of support, without an identification made in any gospel, without any textual basis in the New Testament. He simply said, they are one woman, a repentant prostitute. And they believed him for 1,378 years. The Vatican officially corrected this in 1969. A revision to the Roman Missal separated the feast days. The 3 women were formally distinguished. There was no announcement, no statement of correction, no acknowledgement of what had happened for 14 centuries, no letter to the parishes, no apology to the woman, or to the people who had been taught her story in the wrong version for their entire lives. The slander lasted longer than the Roman Empire. The correction came and went without a sound. Now, pay attention to this, because this is where the passage becomes more interesting than the argument about the missing word. The Gospel of Philip describes Mary Magdalene using a specific term. The Coptic text uses the Greek word koinonos, which appears 3 times in the Gospel of Philip, in reference to Magdalene. This is not a term unique to Gnostic literature. Paul uses it in Philippians chapter 1, verse 5, partnership in the gospel. He uses it in Philemon chapter 1, verse 17, as a partner. He uses it in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 23. The standard New Testament Greek lexicon, the Bauer, Dunker, Arndt, and Gingrich lexicon, that is the reference tool for academic New Testament Greek scholarship, lists the primary meanings as companion, partner, sharer in something. No inherent romantic or sexual connotation, no inherent hierarchy of subordination. Not follower, not disciple, not servant, partner, equal, sharer. The Gospel of Philip calls Magdalene the koinonos of the Savior 3 times. That is the Gospel's actual claim about her identity. Not the kiss, the koinonos. And then there is the kiss itself. Paul mentions a holy kiss 4 times in his letters. Romans chapter 16, verse 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 20. 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 26. In each case, greet one another with a holy kiss. In Valentinian Gnostic theology, the tradition that produced the Gospel of Philip, the kiss between teacher and advanced disciple had a specific sacramental function. The Gospel of Philip explains it directly, in a passage that is not damaged, not lacuna, not missing a single word. Page 59, lines 1 through 6. The perfect conceive through a kiss and give birth. For this reason we also kiss one another. We receive conception from the grace which is in one another. The kiss in this tradition was the transmission of pneuma, the divine breath, the living spirit. Teacher to disciple. The spiritual content of the teacher's understanding breathed, enacted, embodied in the physical gesture of the kiss. It was the sacramental act of knowledge transmission, not a romance, a ritual, an act of gnosis transfer. And the Gospel of Philip says that Magdalene received it, more than all the disciples. Which raises the question the text actually wants you to sit with. If the kiss is an act of spiritual transmission, and she received it most, what does that mean about what she understood? I want to be precise about what is in the manuscript and what is not. The lacuna, the hole in the papyrus, affects only the word describing where the kiss was placed. The rest of the passage is intact. Christ loved her more than all the disciples. That is not in a damaged section. That is legible Coptic text. Used to kiss her often. Not damaged, intact. The rest of the disciples were offended by it and expressed disapproval. Intact. Why do you love her more than all of us? Intact. Why do I not love you like her? Intact. The damage affects one word. The rest of the theological claim is clear. And that claim is not about a romance. Look at what the disciples actually ask. They say nothing about a romance. They ask, why do you love her more than all of us? That is a theological question, a question about spiritual rank. These men understood within their own Valentinian tradition what the kiss meant. They understood it was the transmission of gnosis, the breath of spiritual knowledge, the act of a teacher conferring understanding on the disciple who had prepared most fully to receive it. And she was receiving it more. Not in a romantic sense, in the sense that mattered most to this tradition. She was the disciple whose understanding had gone deepest, the one Jesus considered most fully prepared for the transmission of what he knew. The offense of the other disciples was not jealousy of a relationship. It was the humiliation of men who had expected to be first and been told in the most embodied possible way that they were not. Gregory I published his homily in the year 591. When he combined 3 separate women into one figure and labeled her a repentant prostitute, he was making a choice with institutional logic behind it. Not necessarily a conscious conspiracy against one woman, a choice that solved a structural problem. Because the canonical Gospels, taken on their own terms, describe Mary Magdalene in ways that are difficult for a hierarchy of male apostolic succession to accommodate. She supports Jesus and the disciples financially. She is a woman of means and independence. She is present at the crucifixion when most of the male disciples have fled. She is at the tomb. She is the first witness of the resurrection, the first person to whom the risen Christ appears, according to the Gospel of John. The word apostle means one who is sent. In John chapter 20, verse 17, the risen Christ tells Magdalene to go and tell his brothers. She is commissioned. She is sent. Some early Christian writers used the phrase apostle to the apostles. She announces the resurrection to the 12. None of this appears in Gregory's homily. What appears is the weeping woman, the sinful woman, the woman defined by her failure and her gratitude. Not the woman who stayed when the others ran, not the first witness, not the one Jesus sent, the one who wept and knew her place. The institution that Gregory built could not accommodate what the canonical Gospels themselves described. So it built a different Magdalene instead. You have seen the image 100 times. Jesus in the center. The disciples gathered around him. A woman nearby. Maybe at his feet. Maybe beside him at the table. You absorbed the composition before you had language for it. Power arranged in the way you had always been told power was arranged. The woman at the periphery. The men at the center. Now read the Gospel of Philip again. The disciples see Jesus kiss Magdalene more than them. They don't ask about a romance. They don't whisper to each other about an inappropriate relationship. They ask, why do you love her more than all of us? Feel what is inside that question. These are men who have left their livelihoods, their families, who have walked with this teacher for years, who have accepted somewhere in the deepest part of themselves that they are the ones being prepared, the ones being chosen, the ones at the center of what is happening. And now the teacher turns to a woman. Again, more than them. And the question that comes out is not personal, it is hierarchical. Why her more than us? Which means we expected to be first. We understood ourselves to be first. The entire structure of our spiritual lives has been organized around being first, and we are not. That is the question inside the question. And his answer makes it worse. Why do I not love you like her? Not, I love you all equally. Not, you are all precious to me. Not a diplomat's reassurance. A question returned. Why don't I? The disciples knew exactly what was being said. They understood what the kiss meant in their tradition. They understood that she was receiving the transmission of gnosis more fully than them, more often, more deeply. Their offense was not about a romance. It was the humiliation of men who had assumed their position and discovered it was not what they thought it was. JJJ. Benitez returned to Mary Magdalene across the entire arc of the Caballo de Troya series, not as a romantic figure, as a witness to an interior dimension that the other disciples were still reaching toward. In his post-series interviews, Benitez is explicit about what he believes the institutional church could not accommodate. He describes the church's reduction of Magdalene to a sinful woman as the most precise example of institutional self-preservation he has documented across 40 years of investigation. Precise is the right word. Not crude, not arbitrary. Precise. The Gospel of Philip places a woman at the top of the spiritual hierarchy, above Peter, above the 12. Magdalene. Koinonos? Partner. Primary recipient of the pneumatic kiss. The disciple who understood most. The institutional church was building something specific in the first few centuries of the Common Era, a chain of male apostolic succession. Peter to Linus to Anacletus to Clement. Unbroken, masculine, the authority descending through ordination, through consecration, through the laying on of hands in an uninterrupted line from the fishermen of Galilee. If Magdalene received the transmission of gnosis more fully than Peter, if the Gospel of Philip's claim is credible, even partially, then the chain has a problem. The deepest transmission of what Jesus knew did not flow primarily through the 12. It flowed most fully through a woman the institution had left behind. Benitez frames the suppression not primarily as hatred of women, though its effects on women in church history were severe, but as institutional survival logic. The hierarchy needed a single, unbroken line. The Gospel of Philip described a different line, and the disciple at the top of that line could not remain in history as what the text described her as. So she became something else. A sinner. Grateful? In her place. Elaine Pagels published The Gnostic Gospels in 1979. Princeton University. National Book Award winner. The first major accessible treatment of the Nag Hammadi texts for a general audience. Her argument is not a conspiracy theory, it is an organizational analysis. The canonical Gospels and the Gnostic texts represent two distinct early Christian communities with fundamentally different understandings of where authority lives. The canonical tradition organized authority around apostolic hierarchy. Peter, the 12, their male successors. Authority flows through ordination, through the laying on of hands, through institutional succession. The Valentinian Gnostic tradition organized authority around gnosis, around depth of understanding, around spiritual capacity, regardless of gender or institutional position. In the Valentinian framework, the most authoritative figure is the one who has received and can transmit the deepest knowledge. The Gospel of Philip says that person was Magdalene. Bart Ehrman, New Testament scholar at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, has written extensively about the kiss passage. His argument, the kiss is almost certainly about ritual spiritual transmission, not romantic intimacy. The Valentinian sacramental context is clear enough that most scholars agree on this. But Ehrman is equally insistent about the part of the passage that is not a lacuna. Loved her more than all the disciples. Not damaged, not reconstructed. Not a translator's inference. That is the Gospel of Philip's central theological claim about Magdalene's status. Not that Jesus kissed her on the mouth, that he loved her most, that she was first. Both traditions, the canonical and the Gnostic, existed simultaneously in the 1st and 2nd centuries. Both had communities. Both had teachers. Both had texts that communities gathered to read and study and argue about. One of them won, politically, in the late 2nd and 3rd centuries. The other was buried in a clay jar in 367. Then a farmer broke open the jar in 1945. And now we are here. There is a word missing from the most famous verse in early Christian controversy. You know this now. Not as a theological position, as a fact about a specific piece of papyrus in a museum in Cairo. The papyrus is damaged at exactly the point where the argument lives. The word that built a best-selling novel that has been repeated in 1,000 documentaries and heated conversations about what Jesus and Mary Magdalene were to each other. That word is a blank space, a lacuna, a place where the material is gone and no one can say with certainty what was there. But here is what is not a blank space. Loved her more than all the disciples. Intact. Used to kiss her often. Intact. The disciples' question? Why do you love her more than all of us? Intact. His answer? Why do I not love you like her? Intact. The word koinonos. Her designation as his partner, his equal, his spiritual companion, present in the undamaged text 3 times. All of that is there. The church told you she was a prostitute for 1,378 years, a repentant woman, defined by her failure and her gratitude, safely peripheral, safely explained. That version was invented in 591 by a man who never saw the Gospel of Philip, because it had been buried in a jar in Egypt since 367. The version in the text, the one that the desert kept for over 15 centuries, describes the disciple who understood most, the one Jesus loved more than the 12. The one who received the deepest transmission of what he knew. The one the male disciples were not offended by romantically. They were offended because she was first. You may have always sensed that her story had been taken from her. Reduced. Diminished. Remade into something smaller and safer. If you felt that, if something in you recognized the diminishment before you had words for it, you were not projecting. You were sensing a document that had been in the desert all along. The word is missing. The woman is not. She has been there the whole time in the undamaged portions of the text, in the lines that 16 centuries of desert could not erase, loved and first and understood and feared by the men who decided what we would remember. The desert kept her. And now you know.